When the Electro Giant entered Clash Royale, many players thought he was going to be just another big tank like the Giant or the Golem. What they got instead was a card that changed how entire matches felt. The Electro Giant cost 7 Elixir, which already makes him one of the most expensive units in the game, but the value he delivered during his peak meta made him worth every drop. His special ability reflected damage back at any troop that targeted him. That meant swarms or quick damage dealers like Inferno Dragon or Sparky often struggled to take him down efficiently. This mechanic flipped the usual Clash Royale rules. Normally you are rewarded for defending with smaller, cheaper troops that can overwhelm big tanks. With Electro Giant, those defenses turned into a risk. Dropping skeletons, bats, or goblins could be risky because of his reflected damage. This forced players into expensive defensive cycles that often left them drained of elixir. The result was a card that could walk straight to the tower while the opponent scrambled to find an answer. Electro Giant's dominance created one of the most repetitive metas in Clash Royale history. Matches often boiled down to planting him at the bridge and watching him stomp forward while reflecting everything. The lack of variety made the ladder and tournaments feel suffocating. The real frustration with the Electro Giant meta came when players began pairing him with cards that made his already overwhelming presence even harder to stop. Mirror was one of the biggest offenders. Dropping a second Electro Giant right after the first one forced defenders to spend double the elixir and double the effort just to survive. This combination with Mirror and Golden Knight peaked in late 2022. The Golden Knight's dash ability cleared out backline defenders that might have slowed the Electro Giant down, while Mirror simply made the push unstoppable. This deck required little creativity or timing. Many players complained that all you had to do was drop Electro Giant at the bridge and let his reflect mechanic handle the rest. It was a brain-dead strategy, as the community called it, because the skill ceiling was almost non-existent. Decks that usually thrived on careful placements and elixir management were shut down by the brute force of repeated Electro Giant pushes. The meta also revealed a balance flaw in the game. Electro Giant punished low-cost defenses too heavily, which meant a huge section of the card pool became unusable. Why bother running Skeleton Army or Goblin Gang when they just zapped themselves against his electric skin? This narrowed the viable decks in the meta and created a cycle where the same strategies dominated ladder and competitive play. The repetitive gameplay and lack of counter variety cemented this period as one of the worst metas Clash Royale had ever seen. Another reason the Electro Giant meta left such a bitter taste was how it warped the entire ladder environment. If you were not running a direct counter like a building heavy control deck, you were basically at a disadvantage the moment the match started. And even with the right counters, Mirror could lead to repeated pushes, making matches feel overwhelming. That hopeless feeling made games feel unfair rather than competitive. On top of that, many players at the time were vocal about the card's cost-to-value ratio. Electro Giant cost 7 elixir, but almost always gave back more in value by destroying swarms and chunking towers. When paired with the Golden Knight, the dash would clear defensive troops that could otherwise buy time. The synergy was almost too clean and made it easy for even casual players to win matches they had no business winning. It also didn't help that this meta lasted for months before real adjustments were made. During this period, the forums, Reddit, and community hubs were filled with complaints about how stale the game had become. Facing the same Mirror Electro Giant push, every few games drained excitement from playing. Many players expressed frustration over repeated Mirror Electro Giant pushes. This was not just a strong card, it was a meta-defining mistake. Looking back now, the Electro Giant meta has become a cautionary tale in Clash Royale history. It showed what happens when a single card and a single strategy are allowed to dominate unchecked. The combination of Electro Giant with Mirror and Golden Knight wasn't just powerful, it was brainless in a way that sucked the life out of the game. When winning doesn't feel earned and losing feels inevitable, players naturally lose patience and respect for the balance of the game. What made it worse was how limited the solutions felt. If you didn't want to carry a building or invest heavily in single target damage, you were basically punished every match, and when people are forced into the same few decks, variety disappears. A game that thrives on creativity and surprise suddenly became predictable and repetitive. Every battle felt like deja vu, and not in a good way. Eventually, balance changes did tone things down, but by then, the damage was done. The Electro Giant meta left a stain because it represented everything players don't want from Clash Royale. It was low skill, it rewarded spamming at the bridge, and it punished thoughtful play. For many, this was the moment they realized how fragile the fun of the game can be when balance slips away. Even today, the words Electro Giant Mirror can make longtime players roll their eyes because the memory of that miserable stretch is still fresh. The meta was not just bad, it was one of the worst ever. Boss Bandit meta. When the Boss Bandit was released in April 2025, she instantly carved her name into one of the most hated metas Clash Royale has ever seen. At first glance, she looked like a fun twist on the Bandit family line, a forest rogue with flair and a special dash that let her chain from target to target. But once players realized how broken her numbers were, the game quickly became unplayable for anyone not abusing her. Her dash was supposed to feel clever, but instead it often slipped into what players called infinite dash loops. One moment she would dash into your tower guard, then zip backward onto a troop, then forward again before you even had a chance to drop a counter. The problem wasn't just her ability, it was how much health she had. For a card themed around agility, she could tank more hits than many mini tanks. That meant she wasn't just an annoying distraction, she became a full win condition on her own. The popular Boss Bandit Suspicious Bush decks showed up everywhere during this meta. People spammed her behind cycle troops or cheap distractions, then let her dash mechanics shred whatever stood in her way. If you didn't have the exact counter ready at the perfect moment, she tore through your defenses like paper. The result was frustration. It didn't feel like you were outplayed, it felt like you were bullied by bad design. And nothing kills a meta faster than players feeling like their choices don't matter. The reaction to the Boss Bandit meta was explosive, and honestly, I don't blame anyone. It felt like every match was the same story. Queue up to see Boss Bandit on the bridge, and already feel like the game is slipping away. I remember scrolling through forums and Discord, and all anyone talked about was how unfair she felt. Players were posting clips of her dashing back and forth endlessly while towers melted. It felt frustrating to play against due to the dash mechanic. Personally, I think what made it sting even more was the betrayal of expectations. The Bandit had always been a fan favorite, a cheeky assassin that punished bad plays but wasn't unstoppable. When the Boss Bandit dropped, she was marketed as an exciting twist, but in reality, she completely overshadowed the game. People who had been playing for years suddenly felt like their knowledge and skill meant nothing. You could outcycle an opponent perfectly and still lose to a single mistimed dash. That's not strategy. That's madness. And the worst part was how helpless it felt. Sure, you could rocket her or drop a PEKKA, but you were always trading at a loss. Matches became repetitive, frustrating, and way too predictable. Many players either ran her or adjusted decks to survive her pushes. I don't think I've ever seen the community so united in hating a card before. It wasn't just annoying, it felt like Clash Royale had been hijacked. Looking back, the Boss Bandit meta will probably go down as one of the most chaotic times in Clash Royale history. It was not just that she was too strong, it was that she warped the entire way the game was played. Every ladder match, every tournament set, and every casual battle became centered around her. If you didn't have her unlocked, you were simply at a disadvantage. If you did have her, you felt almost forced to use her because ignoring her meant losing to those endless dash loops. What makes this meta stand out to me as one of the absolute worst is the lack of variety it caused. Clash Royale at its best is about creativity and mixing strategies, but during the Boss Bandit era, it felt like there was only one correct answer. Decks that had thrived for years disappeared overnight. Players were so focused on either abusing her or surviving her that the entire game shrank to this tiny predictable cycle. The frustration wasn't just with her strength, but with how unfair it felt to play against. Even strong counters often failed because of her weird mechanics. She could dash out of stunts, and she could clip around troops in ways that didn't even look intentional. It gave her this aura of being untouchable, and that completely killed the fun for a lot of people. That is why whenever people talk about the worst metas, the Boss Bandit era always comes up. It was broken, oppressive, and exhausting. For many players, it was the point where they said, enough is enough. Executioner Elixir Golem meta. The Executioner Elixir Golem meta in November 2021 is remembered as one of the most embarrassing moments in Clash Royale history. The whole mess started because of a balance change gone wrong. The Executioner was adjusted to make his axe more reliable, but the tweak accidentally turned him into a monster. Instead of a clean fix, he became so strong that he could shred through almost everything. Combine that with the Elixir Golem, which was already considered one of the most hated cards in the game, and the result was chaos. Players quickly realized that dropping an Elixir Golem at the bridge and backing it with the broken Executioner created pushes that were almost impossible to stop. Even if you defended, you gave your opponent Elixir back, which they used to repeat the same push again. The Executioner standing behind the Golem just deleted swarms and air units with no effort. Games turned into the same repetitive sequence over and over. It didn't matter if you played carefully or built a strong defense, the combo crushed you anyway. The situation got so bad that Supercell had to roll out emergency balance changes due to community backlash. Balance updates are supposed to refresh the game, not ruin it, and this one did the opposite. People were calling it unplayable, and even competitive players admitted that the ladder felt like a joke. For many, this was one of the lowest points of the game and proof of how a single mistake in balancing can break everything. The ugliest part of the Executioner Elixir Golem meta was how little thought it demanded. Clash Royale has always been a game that rewards timing, positioning, and smart elixir trades, but in November 2021, you could throw down an Elixir Golem, slap an overpowered Executioner behind it, and watch the game play itself. The Executioner's axe cut through everything with a single swing, while the Golem soaked damage and refunded elixir once killed. I remember players complaining that defending felt pointless. If you use swarms, the Executioner deleted them instantly. If you dropped air troops, he clipped them down with the same axe throw. If you tried to build a tanky counter push of the Golem's death elixir, just let your opponent cycle back faster. The synergy was so ridiculous that even average players suddenly climbed trophies they had never seen before. That alone told you how busted the meta was. The community mood shifted from frustration to straight up comedy. Memes flooded Reddit with players joking that they weren't playing Clash Royale anymore, but rather Executioner Simulator. Counterplay technically existed, but it was limited and frustrating. If you didn't have very specific answers, Executioner and Blob decks could easily overwhelm you. It's rare to see a balance change so universally hated, but this one hit the jackpot. People begged for an emergency fix because the game felt like it had lost its skill factor. The Executioner and Elixir Golem together made even the most dedicated players question why they were still queuing up. The funny thing is, the Executioner wasn't even meant to be this dominant. Supercell admitted later that something went wrong with a balance update that month. His axe was coded to hit harder and wider than intended, so instead of being a balanced splash support, he turned into an unstoppable wrecking ball. Pair that with a card like Elixir Golem that was already controversial, and you had the perfect recipe for one of the most hated metas in Clash Royale history. Elixir Golem by itself had always been divisive. When combined with a broken Executioner, the card's weaknesses disappeared. The Executioner cleared everything before defenders could capitalize on the death elixir, leaving you stuck with extra elixir, but no troops on the board to actually use it. It almost made defending against the Golem much more difficult than intended. I think what made people angriest was how this meta stripped away the learning curve. Normally when a new strategy dominates, you can study it, figure out counters, and slowly adapt, but here, no amount of adaptation helped. The Executioner outvalued every response, while the Elixir Golem gave elixir for the opponent who was defending against him. It was oppressive in a way that didn't respect player skill, and that's probably why Supercell had to step in so fast. The backlash wasn't just loud, it was unified. Many players agreed this meta was frustrating and overpowered. When I look back on this meta, it feels less like a competitive season and more like a temporary glitch in Clash Royale's history. The Executioner was a monster, Elixir Golem was toxic, and together they made the ladder and tournaments nearly unplayable. You couldn't queue into a match without bracing yourself for that same tired combo. The gameplay loop was repetitive, boring, and honestly insulting. It wasn't about timing, prediction, or smart elixir trades. It was about who could drop the combo first and snowball harder. The craziest part is how quickly Supercell had to own up to the mistake. Within days, the community was full of clips, memes, and outrage. Even pros called it one of the worst balance mishaps in years. Supercell actually issued an apology, which is rare for them, and rolled out emergency changes to fix the Executioner. That move alone shows just how unplayable things had become. If a developer is forced to backpedal that fast, you know the game was drowning. From my own perspective, I think the scar this meta left had less to do with the cards themselves and more to do with trust. Players rely on balance updates to keep the game fair and interesting. When a mistake this big slips through, it makes people question whether the devs are in control at all. It shook confidence in a way that lasted far beyond the fix. So, while the Executioner Elixir Golem meta was short-lived, it's remembered as a kind of warning sign. It proved how fragile balance really is and how quickly one oversight can turn Clash Royale into chaos. September-December 2019 meta. The end of 2019 was one of the strangest stretches in Clash Royale's history. September kicked off with balance changes that threw the entire ladder and competitive scene into chaos. Suddenly, cards that had been considered safe picks became liabilities, while others skyrocketed into dominance in ways nobody could have predicted. One of the biggest offenders was the Elixir Golem, which was introduced in October 2019. At first glance, it looked like a meme card. Splitting into blobs that actually gave your opponent elixir sounded like a death sentence for anyone crazy enough to use it, but in practice, it became one of the most frustrating win conditions Clash Royale had ever seen. Paired with Night Witch and Rage, the Elixir Golem turned matches into unstoppable steamrolls. Players called it the walking pay-to-win blob, because once it hit your tower, there was basically no coming back. The only counter was to pray you had the perfect lineup of DPS troops. But even then, the Radiant Healer would erase your defense in seconds. By November, it wasn't just the Elixir Golem warping the game. Executioner's September 2019 rework massively increased his damage by over 80% while reducing his range. The change made him feel unstoppable and led to a surge in Executioner Tornado decks. Pair him with Tornado, and suddenly, the Nadio Executioner combo became an unkillable, brainless defensive core. For a while, the latter felt like every single deck had either Elixir Golem Cheese or the Tornado Executioner lockdown. And Supercell? They were getting flamed left and right. This wasn't just a balance oversight, it was the kind of sloppy patching that left players wondering if anyone was actually playtesting these changes before release. Between September and December, the game was less about outplaying your opponent and more about surviving whatever broken nonsense they queued up with. By late October and November, the Elixir Golem had completely taken over Clash Royale. And the worst part, it wasn't just ladder players abusing it, it was pros too. At CRL events, you'd tune in expecting high-skill, surgical gameplay, but instead you'd see the exact same blueprint. Elixir Golem dropped at the bridge, Battle Healer locked in behind, Night Witch pumping out bats and poison to make everything twice as obnoxious. Once that push got rolling, it didn't matter if you defended perfectly, your tower melted, and suddenly you were looking at a 3-crown loss. The Battle Healer herself deserves special mention. She was added on the 2nd of December in 2019. She wasn't just broken, she was unfair in ways Clash Royale had rarely seen before. She could heal herself and everything around her while still dishing out consistent chip damage. Combined with the tanky blobs of the Elixir Golem, it felt like you were trying to fight a push that literally refused to die. And for players who didn't have high DPS cards leveled up, forget it. This deck farmed trophies off under-leveled opponents like it was free candy. Players started calling it the no-skill win button deck because it required almost zero finesse to pull off. Drop your combo, rage it, and wait for your opponent to drown in blobs. Entire Reddit threads were dedicated to flaming Supercell for letting something this toxic dominate for so long. Even competitive casters looked visibly tired of commentating the same mirror matches over and over again. And then came the Executioner Tornado combo, which didn't disappear despite the rise of the blob deck. If you weren't running Elixir Golem, chances are you were running some version of NATO Executioner control. The overbuffed Executioner axe made him practically immortal on defense, clearing out swarms, glass cannons, and support units with zero effort. Together with Tornado, it was an auto reset button for any push you tried to build. Facing Executioner decks felt less like playing Clash Royale and more like watching your entire army get erased by one guy throwing an axe in slow motion. The combination of these two broken archetypes created what many players called the least fun meta ever. You were either spamming blobs or running into bugged Exinado with very little room for creativity. The game's balance was so warped that it felt like every other card was irrelevant. By the time December rolled around, the Clash Royale community had reached a boiling point. Everywhere you looked, players were fed up. YouTube comment sections were full of people complaining that the game had lost its balance. Reddit was a minefield of memes roasting Supercell for letting the Elixir Golem blob deck run unchecked, and pro players were openly calling the meta one of the worst in the game's history. The most infamous deck was Elixir Golem paired with Battle, Healer, and Rage. It felt nearly unstoppable in mid-ladder play because the healer would erase damage while the blob marched forward, but top players could still find ways to manage it. Supercell eventually had to step in, and not just with balance changes. Supercell rolled back changes by late November due to the imbalance. By late November, they reverted Executioner and Witch back toward their old forms. For the first time in months, Clash Royale began to feel like Clash Royale again, but the damage had already been done. Players had started calling that fall the dark age of the game, where matches were decided more by card design flaws than by actual skill. Looking back, the reason this meta stands out as one of the worst isn't just because it was unbalanced. Clash Royale has seen broken cards before. What made it late 2019 infamous was how long the chaos lasted and how little variety it offered. Deck diversity was almost non-existent. If you weren't spamming blobs, you were running into bugged Executioner Tornado, and that left the game feeling repetitive, frustrating, and unfair. Matches blurred together. You didn't remember your victories or defeats because every battle looked exactly the same. Even today, when players talk about the worst metas ever, September to December 2019 almost always makes the list. It's a perfect example of how one bad design choice can warp an entire game, alienating casuals and pros alike. And while balance eventually returned, the scars of that meta are still remembered, making it a defining low point in Clash Royale history.